Assalamu alaikum everyone. This is Samar Hassan, founder of Epiphany, which is a social enterprise working currently in Pakistan. We work with impact startups, hence, of course, the topic for today, which is really, really important, the role of impact investment in the new world. So I'm very, very excited because I've got a very diverse panel, not just in terms of experience, but also in terms of geographical diversity. And thank you very, very much, because some people have joined us while they're fasting. Other people have joined us super, super early in their day. So as part of one of the things that Epiphany started doing when we saw COVID-19 and the confusion, which the community that we work with, primarily social entrepreneurs and impact startups, we saw that there was a lot of confusion in during COVID crisis about how to approach investment, about how to pivot, about how to change their business models, and so on. Operationally, of course, there were a lot of questions as well. So we started hosting these series of talks called Epiphany Talks. And essentially each time we've got different topics that we explore in depth with different experts. So with me, allow me to introduce Dr. Nirmal De Silva from Sri Lanka. He's an impact investor, a very, very good friend of ours, and also an associate professor in Sri Lanka. So he's also a social entrepreneur. So welcome, Dr. De Silva. How are you doing?
I'm good, Sama. Thanks for having me. Aibon to everybody.
Aibon to you as well. You may remember that recently we hosted Dr. Nirmal just last week. Actually, he was a co-host with me for another very, very important topic that we discussed, which was about social entrepreneurship and COVID-19, the new opportunities as well as the challenges that have arisen for the social enterprise sector. So, Dr. Nirmal, I'm deeply thankful not only that you've joined us today, but also because you introduced me to our next panelist, who is none other than Sonia Bashir Kabir from SBK Tech Ventures. So, thank you so much, Sonia, for joining us. How are you doing?
Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon from Bangladesh. I'm doing very well. Thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this exciting panel.
Okay, so by the way, Sonia speaks very good Urdu. So, some of the questions that you're going to be posing today may very well be in Urdu as well. Next, I'm going to, add Faraz onto this screen. So Faraz is somebody I wish I was, okay? And I hope to be when I grow up, okay? So on a very, very old. So yes, thank you. Aren't you happy that I just indicated that you're older than I am? But so Faraz is somebody that probably one of the people that I respect the most in the social enterprise sector. And he's been doing some fantastic work, not just in terms of social impact investments as well as other types of investments, but also taking a very cross-cutting view across the entire micro enterprise entrepreneurship sector. So he's kind of like the go-to person for me personally and for a lot of other social entrepreneurs. So Faraz, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Summer. It's lovely to be here. Good afternoon and good morning to people, whoever they are at this point of time, and happy Ramadan. And looking forward to learning and sharing with a very esteemed panel of colleagues. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. Next, we've got Cindy Langer, who's joined us from UAE, from Dubai. And Cindy is part of Falcon Network, which is an angel investors network. So Cindy, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. Salam alaikum, everyone, and Ramadan Mubarak. Yeah, I really appreciate that there is such a huge demand also now for impact investment, both from the startup as well as from the investor perspective. And I hope that I can share a little bit more on that later, inshallah.
Okay, and last but not the least, we've got Bradley, who's joined us from Atlanta. So it's 6:04 a.m. for him, and he didn't get a chance to make his coffee. But thank you, Bradley, for being with us here.
It's an honor to be here, and good afternoon, and I look forward to the discussion.
All right, so Bradley is an angel investor who's been investing for the past 25 years or so. And obviously, we are now going to ask everybody to introduce themselves a little bit more. So Nirmal, do you want to start?
Yeah, so Sama, again, thanks a lot for having me today. I'll just give a bit of a background of what we've been doing. So I got to this area of impact investment to a good friend of mine, Mr. Chandra Abevikrama, who I believe is the godfather of impact investment in Sri Lanka. He set up the Lanka Impact Investment Network, which I serve on the board as well. And mainly the idea was to ensure that we create an ecosystem for impact investment and to develop social entrepreneurship in Sri Lanka. So we did a wonderful program about 2 years ago called Epiphany, which is, I think, the world's first social entrepreneurship and impact investment reality TV program. It was modeled similar to Shark Tank and Dragon's Den in the Western world, but this was predominantly towards social entrepreneurship and empowering the rural entrepreneurship in the country. So we've been running it for 2 seasons, and hopefully season 3 will come in as well. And we've seen a silent economic revolution as a result of power and impact investment coming into the country. Because it's a relatively new space, but at the same time, a lot of wonderful work is happening. We are also proud to announce that we've partnered with UNDP and founded a concept for a $20 million and a $5 million fund purely to support social entrepreneurship in Sri Lanka. So maybe in the next round, I will talk a little bit about some of the work that we've done, the best practices, as well as what I see the future of impact investment post-COVID-19.
Thank you, Nirmal. Remind me to take your autograph, right? Because you're a TV celebrity in Sri Lanka, and I have not done that yet. So thank you so much, Nirmal, for joining us. Sonia, over to you. Could you introduce yourself a little bit more?
Hi, I'm Sonia. I'm basically a tech professional. I lived in Silicon Valley for 20 years, and I was working for high-tech firms. Moved back to Bangladesh. It's been about over 10 years. And I've been looking at the tech space very closely in South Asia. I just recently, I quit my job in Microsoft and I started my tech venture fund. I'm also in the board of the United Nations Technology Bank for Least Developed Countries. My passion is looking at emerging markets and how technology can solve solutions that affect citizen services.
Okay, thank you, Sonia. Yes, Faraz, we're back with you.
Thank you, Summer. So previous life, I was a banker, so my apologies for that. And since 17 years, we've been investing in commercial startups, and for the past 11 years, social enterprise and impact startups. We have an internal fund in Pakistan. We manage the Scottish government's fund for Pakistan. And we're working with various development sector organizations like UNDP, British Asian Trust, Princess Trust International, the ecosystem side. Our portfolio, so far, I think we've invested more than 85 businesses, out of which around 80% failed, but the remaining did reasonably well, and 5 of them have become national companies. So that's just the overall frame that we have, and we would like to actually share a few other things relevant to the conversation later on. Thank you.
Okay, great. Cindy.
Yes, hi, thanks again. So the Falcon Network, basically the whole reason why we exist in the first place was because we saw that there's a lot more startups coming up now here in the region, in the MENA region, but also in Southeast Asia, for example, that are actually impact driven, and we were very happy to see that. But because impact investment is still quite nascent right now in this region, we also saw that there was a lack of funding, and therefore we created basically a platform. So the Falcon Network is nothing but a connector between startups, impact-driven startups who need funding, and investors who are exactly looking for these kind of investments. And so we've been able to we've been very well received from investors. We've been able to have over 50 investors right now, who are basically part of that platform. And we're now closing another round right now. We have several hundreds of applications for the rounds, and they're coming from all over the global south. So yeah, it's we're very happy to see that our thesis was actually proven right. It was not just a hypothesis. And yeah, we're just here basically here today also just to give a little bit more of an insight of what we observed within that space, because we think that it's very important, especially moving forward post COVID-19, as we'll probably discuss later.
Absolutely. No, Cindy, this is really, really important. And sometimes this is a big service to social enterprises and impact startups, which we don't even realize, because access to finance is a real problem. So I think this is great that you're doing this. Bradley, you've been doing making angel investments since forever. So tell us a little bit
Yeah, I'm old.
3 times I'm very ageist.
Thank you for the invite again. So my background, about 20 years ago, started an agency doing software development. From that agency, spun out a few different companies. And about 7 years ago, made my first angel investments very rapidly, focusing on early stage tech startups, most with an AI component or something to make them special. Been thrown into this environment, as we all have, and trying to figure out what to do with the portfolio, and then helping other investors and funds determine what the direction is going to be, or at least guess of where we're headed, and what to do to manage the crisis we're in. This is evolving every day, and it's new and scary. And I think we're getting a little bit of clarity of where we're going to go. And I'm looking forward to discussing what you're seeing outside of the US and how startups are being treated in organizations.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So Faraz, the first question that I've got is for you. I think it's important for the audience to define what impact entrepreneurship is. And how is it different from other types of entrepreneurship?
Thank you, Summer. Well, the concept is very simple. There is not-for-profit on one spectrum, and then there is for-profit on the other spectrum. Social enterprise and impact entrepreneurship is somewhere in the middle, where return on the investment is important, but the measurable positive impact on society or environment is equally important and is considered as important as return on investment. It's as simple as that. And more the youth and more the wider stakeholders are getting more interested and seeing the fair share value of this paradigm compared to the not-for-profit and conventional for-profit sector. I think I came across this concept around 14, 15 years back, and it just resonated that, hey, this is, personally, I don't kind of believe in an absolute not-for-profit concept, although there are fantastic not-for-profits which are working. All our lives, I think we have worked in for-profit environments, and where capitalism has played a very significant and a lot of times good role. But the more you grow, the more you realize that, a point comes that it becomes unfair. And more vulturistic, as Summer and I, we've been discussing this concept. So social enterprise just provides you that kind of a frame in which when you actually do business, or you create some kind of a sale for good or service, you also take care of your communities and surroundings as well. And interestingly, that concept has taken a big leap forward in the past decade. And now wider stakeholders like governments, development sector, conventional private sector, the conventional capital, all have recognized the importance and efficacy of this concept.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for identifying and defining the concept, because I think that's really, really important to set the tone, right for this particular panel. So Nirmal, I'd like to start off with a question from you. What do you think is the impact of COVID-19 on investment in general? What are you observing? And particularly on impact investment, what do you think the impact has been?
Right. So I'll probably try to answer this by taking it forward from where Faraz actually ended. Because the Global Impact Investment Network in April 2019 proclaimed that around $510 billion is the overall impact funding towards the space. Now, from a Sri Lankan perspective, a very small country, our entire GDP is only 80 billion. So it's 6 times our total GDP on the impact space. And from my opinion, I believe that more and more companies are trying to be responsible, and they would be also putting more money towards that space. But of course, when you look at from a COVID-19 perspective, any type of investment will take a bit of a backseat. There will be more checks and balances coming in. However, in my humble opinion, I feel that the future will be more towards social entrepreneurship, more community-driven activity, creating impact in societies, etc. So, if that is the case, traditional investments may not work. We will need patient capital. Banks will not be able to fund. If I take a typical Sri Lankan example, with the amount of collateral and double-digit interest rates for borrowings, it's about 13% in Sri Lanka at the moment. It's extremely tough for social entrepreneurship to flourish. So we need passionate impact investors coming into the picture, and corporates also moving away from traditional social responsibility into a more impact-driven thought process. I'll be brutally honest. Across the world, we see companies spending more money marketing CSR work than what they're actually putting into the impact. It's become a marketing tool. But again, even consumers are looking at responsible companies. And as investors, I think we have a right towards our own society and ensuring that impact comes in. Now, how do we measure impact on a global scale? It's a bit of a tough one, but I think we need to still identify and see what are the best ways forward. And for me, I don't go anywhere else. I look at the Sustainable Development Goals. Those remain prior to COVID-19. They will remain even more important post-COVID-19. And there's a lot of areas that things can happen. And just to end the comment, I believe that a lot of millennials and the Generation Z is also being more impact driven. There are some wonderful research to show that they prefer working for companies who are championing a social cause. So I think times are good. However, the immediate short to medium term might have some challenges in terms of how funds are going to be allocated, because most of the countries are still in a lockdown state. But I'm of course very bullish about the prospects in this space and what social entrepreneurship can do to this world.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think you've hit the nail on the head with quite a number of things that you discussed just now, right? So we've also seen in the wake of COVID-19, the CSR budgets being allocated towards health emergency and really solving the crisis. We've also seen a lot of funding going towards daily wagers in Pakistan and supporting those, really who are at the bottom of the pyramid. So we are seeing that trend. The other bit that you mentioned, right? So in Pakistan, 64% of our entire population is under the age of 30. So that I think is great for social enterprises like mine, because at the end of the day, people want to work for social enterprises, even though sometimes social enterprises may not be as great paymasters as other perhaps FMCGs or other sectors. So I think those are some very, very important reflections. Sonia, what are you seeing in Bangladesh? What is happening amidst this COVID-19 crisis?
So, basically inequality costs everyone. And when basic citizen services are not being provided, like we've seen for healthcare, for education, then we see that the government is really needs to look at, there's a paradigm shift and there's a need for acceleration in how they will serve the people. So healthcare, education, we've seen lots of online grocery deliveries, automation coming in. So this has put in a very interesting angle for people who are looking at starting businesses, which would be very, very tech focused and having some investor attention because they impact the lives of people. For example, just look at healthcare, right? No one is safe in the new concept. No one is safe till everyone is safe. So how do you provide services to citizens in our country, in Bangladesh? We have a population of 160 million people, but we have 100,000 doctors. So it's not really possible to be having a face-to-face visit. But online health services is coming up, and that is one big ticket item, I think, globally that we see has a lot of potential. It is definitely impact driven. There are lots of investors who are looking at this space. So just like Nirmal, I'm actually very bullish I think that this is the time where people will have to look at encode the algorithm for how they solve problems and have a tech focus for investors to come in, fund the startup as well as have a positive social impact.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think this is something which is probably most exciting for me as well, because in a way we've been talking about this. We've seen the rise of social entrepreneurship in Pakistan over the last few years, specifically when suddenly social entrepreneurship has become more mainstream. Right? Earlier, people would, there's still question, okay, so there's still some questions about how is it different than other entrepreneurship, but I think we've seen that happening, and now with this COVID-19 crisis, this has presented a great opportunity as well, because everybody's seeing the shifting role of social enterprises as well. And Faraz, you can add more to that. So, the same question to you: how is impact investment shifting, not just in Pakistan but also overall? What's your take on that?
I think keeping in mind this COVID context, what's happening that it is suddenly frog-leaped this concept from an individual concept to a more institutional concept. People are understanding and realizing that the gap that exists in the market between what the masses need and what the governments can provide need to be filled, and social enterprises are solutions that can be scaled up if institutional support and money is provided. Now that phenomena has kind of fast-tracked, at least in Pakistan. You see concepts like risk in Asas government schemes taking place, simply because suddenly the government schemes have realized that they need solutions from small social enterprises that work, that is cost effective, that actually benefits the communities, and they just put institutional and government money to scale it up. So in that way, I think that what was supposed to happen for social enterprises in normal times over the, let's say, 10 years will happen to social enterprises in dire times in 2 years. So that's something that I see happening.
I think that's very, apt anyway, because we're seeing that, and I think that's made our lives easier, because the government now wants to work with social enterprises, and when the government, gives that whole overview, that blanket approval, then automatically we're going to see more happening on the impact investment side as well in Pakistan. But over to you, Cindy, because now you're doing something very, very interesting in the angel investment space. So what are you seeing in terms of angel investors? And you mentioned that those are individual investors, 50 you said. So how are they? Are they, now saving their cash? What are they doing? Or are they actually saying, no, we really want to help support this because this is something that we believe in? So what's happening?
Yeah, so I mean, I can't speak on behalf of all 50 investors, of course. So it is quite a diverse group, but we do see some different trends. So for example, I think in my overall assessment, I would say that investors seem to be a little bit more selective now. So I guess the main issue is not really the healthcare, for example, sector, because oftentimes the question gets raised, of course, is it only healthcare? But I think our investors are more looking at, is this company, whatever sector it is, going to survive the crisis, the economic crisis, not necessarily just COVID itself. So what we do see is a little bit less of, or a little bit, actually quite some less of risk appetite, and being more selective in terms of, how financially sustainable is the startup really, how well formulated is the business model, and also how will it be adaptable, or is it already adaptable to the current COVID crisis and to the situation, seeing that it's much more important to move to the technological side, for example, less in the physical space. So I think that's the main shift that we can observe from the investor's perspective.
So Bradley, same question to you, because you're also heavily involved with the angel investment space in the US. Are you seeing something similar happening over there as well?
Yes. So what Cindy said is accurate here. But stepping back a little bit, in my group of angel investors and fund managers, number one is, what is their portfolio going to do? So my friends are spending a lot of time on portfolio companies and making hard decisions, whether or not picking the winners and losers. They don't have the cash to fund them all indefinitely. So they're making pretty solid decisions or tough decisions on who has a good chance of surviving, who doesn't. The government here is helping a good bit, and we have probably a more favorable environment for some of these early companies. But I see that's being the number one is what do you do with your portfolio? After that, I see, at least in the talks, I haven't seen it in people writing checks yet, that people are getting inspired by some other stories. And there's emotional kind of factor in, not necessarily related to COVID, but in believing in something and believing in someone. And I think after they get outside of this portfolio, at least the early stage investors are looking for somebody that inspires them. A founder that's gone through this crisis and figured out a way to pivot or figured out a way to take market share is inspirational. Somebody that shows something that gives us hope. I don't know that that'll last forever, but I think short term, the funds that are writing checks, that's one thing they're considering. Smaller rounds for sure. I don't see people writing the risk that more risk averse, like Cindy said, and also looking at runway, because that's something that we've somewhat ignored here, because there's going to be another round. So if you have 3 months runway, it's fine because we can just raise more money. Now we've got companies that were doing great, revenue was good, and growing double digits per month, and all of a sudden their industry's gone. And I have several friends that invested heavily in airline-related startups, hotel-related startups, and concerts, sports, and completely gone. And the ones that have enough runway are able to get the market share and stay the course. And I think as the new investments go, that's something that at least my friends are looking at is how long can this company, if something happens, which it won't happen, I think, on this scale again, but it's good to know that you've got 6 months or 12 months. I was talking to somebody yesterday that has 4 years of runway. So these are really appealing to investors.
So, leading on from that, I kind of want to touch upon a question, because startups keep asking, how should we pivot? So right now in this crisis, if they can pivot, which directions should they be pivoting in? Is this a particular, trend which is going to last? Or is this something which is temporary? Are investors just going to gear themselves towards looking at this longer runway, the ability to survive crises like these? What do you guys think? So Nirmal, for you, and then Sonia, Faraz, if you guys can also answer the same question.
Well, it's a bit of a different scenario. You have to look at it from a holistic perspective. And again, we talk about startups identifying the gap analysis, validating their frameworks, looking at minimum viable products, etc. So it depends on which side of the cycle that you are and whether you should pivot or not. But on the other hand, I also see that when you look at agriculture, for example, in Sri Lanka, as a result of the 5-week-long curfew, there is going to be a huge amount of import restrictions. So as a result, I think there's going to be a renewed focus when it comes to local agriculture. And we've seen a number of wonderful players working on that scheme of things using technology as well. So I want to take an example that I used during last time's session as well. So there's a fantastic Sri Lankan social entrepreneurship idea where they are looking at artisans and women empowerment through apparel and so forth. They got severely hit as a result of COVID-19. Most of their orders got impacted and so forth. But what they have done is, instead of just lying low and waiting for things to happen, they've quickly changed their business model to be able to create WHO standard facial masks. So, and that's what that social entrepreneurship has been able to do. That way they've been able to keep their jobs, provide artisans some type of income. So in order to answer your question on whether to pivot or not, will totally depend on the business model of the startups. And from impact investment point of view, it's an interesting time to identify and see whether you work with the founders, their passion, and their capabilities, or are you going to fund opportunities which come into the market, which can be immediate. So it's a bit of a fine balance that you need to pay. Personally, I would take any opportunity at this point of time, as long as we can create impact.
Well, that's why you're an impact investor, right? So that's something which is very true to your mission anyway. But with you, Sonia, what do you think? What is how are the priorities for investors shifting? And then similarly, how can startups and social enterprises or other maybe more traditional businesses, how can they pivot, even if it is for a short time, just changing directions in order to survive, and maybe then they can go back to their previous model. So what do you think?
So in my conversations with institutional investors, it seems to me that their appetite is definitely very risk averse. So this year, they are going to be very cautious. And I think the other thing that I've learned is that they are not really looking for funding startups that are going to create new markets or create new customers. The startups that will be serving the needs of the customers in this existing market or in this existing crisis situation will be getting a lot of attention as impact is created, because there will not be enough money in the economy for people to spend on things that are not considered a basic need. So startups that are not in the idea stage, that are really serving a basic citizen need or service, will have the investors' attention. Another point I would like to highlight, that some of the institutional investors have told me this, which is very encouraging news for startups, that those that have already secured their funding, their clock is ticking. They need to put their money out there, and then the fund life kicks in. So there is some money readily available right now. So startups will need to be pivot in a very meaningful manner. Nobody can reinvent what they're doing, but there are ways of looking at how they can just add a new dimension to their services. Like a lot of these startups that were doing e-commerce are now pivoting to e-pharma, and they're doing a lot of interesting things that will serve the basic needs of people. So investors are looking. The message to the community, the broader community, is that there is money, because those that have secured their funding, they're on a time clock, because the fund life is ticking. So there is funds out there, but it will be very selective. And the other message is that if you have a runway for this year, you are unstoppable from next year. So surviving this year is crucial. Every startup will not survive. Every startup will not be able to pivot, and that is the truth of the matter here. But those that do will actually be on it's like a highway to unicorn. They will be on that highway.
So I think it's coming back to survival of the fittest, literally, right? So if you're able to just survive this crisis, and in a meaningful way. So I think for us, and we've had some conversations about that, right? What does it mean to be meaningful while you are in this crisis, and what are certain practices that you need to be taking to take care of the people and the communities that you're working with? But at the same time, on the other side, if you're approaching impact investors, what perhaps should be some of the strategies that you can adopt?
Well, from the investor's perspective, I mean, I couldn't agree but more with Sonia on the institutional investment mindset right now. There are 6 particular industries, and when I kind of looked at it, it just reminded me that it's going back to basics. So agri, education, health, low-cost housing, digital finance, and digital communication and entertainment. These are 6 industries that institutional and angel investment communities across the board, at least the ones that are in my community, they're looking towards. From the entrepreneur's perspective, like Sonia said, that pivoting is critical. Meaningful pivoting is critical. It's also about if you go a little deep down, it's the cash flow management and how you stretch the dollar more impactfully and for longer is something that investors would like to see. Because at the time of a crisis, the financial management acumen is something that comes really at the focus, and your expenditure heads are going to be very closely monitored, the ones who are already funded. This is exactly what we are doing with our portfolio. That we're making, giving them all the assistance to make sure that the cash flow management continues and it's on positive trend, and the impact they're trying to create is much bigger. And in that way, when you're in a time of a crisis, your creative thinking, your innovative mechanisms, they really, really come in play. They're ones who actually don't think, and they take a nosedive, and the ones who actually pivot and are innovative with the money and the resources and create more impact. Like Sonia said, their future is extremely bright.
So there's a question, I think, for us, if I can pose this to you. Babar Mushtaq is asking, do you think e-learning vertical can get some attention in these changing times? Let me see if I can just show it at the bottom. Yeah, we have not seen much investments in Pakistan within the e-learning vertical. Your comments, please.
Well, yes, of course. I mean, e-learning across the board, overall, globally, has taken an upward trend, and for a very simple reason. Okay, let me just very quickly dive into it. The education system, the learning system of humans is going through a very rapid metamorphosis at this point of time. 10 years ago, if I wanted to do a degree, I had to apply to, let's say, McGill or to Imperial. I had to pay the fee that they wanted. I had to abide by the time that when the course would start and end. I would have no say in what kind of professors I would actually work with. And I had to abide by a very strict schedule and compromise a lot of my personal life and money and resources. That has changed. Now, if I want to do a degree, I can do it in microbit learning at my convenience, in my drawing room or kitchen, at a cost that I determine what is affordable to me, and get a degree of an experience from all across the world sitting on my laptop. That's how that world has changed. Another thing, these really topic, I won't take the name, but one of my friends have recently been hired by an Ivy League British university. And what's his job? His job is to reallocate and all the physical infrastructure, which is like thousands of square foot of that particular university, and develop revenue-generating opportunities for it, simply because the maintenance of that building and that infrastructure is not possible anymore with the revenues that are coming in. And that's his job title. That's what he's looking at, and that's happening all across the world. So the digital learning or e-learning is actually developing a market that these universities or schools or learning institutions never thought at such a low cost. So it's great times for e-learning.
Okay. Yes, Sonia.
So I definitely, I think Faraz, 100% I agree with you. And to answer the question, what we've seen, there was a bit of a lag in accepting e-learning from the private institutions and even from the government. But because of this novel coronavirus, they are now being forced to think differently, and the decision making will be accelerated. And this is where I think this is an area where they'll be looking at, because we cannot stop education. We cannot, as countries go down into lockdown, the show has to go on, education has to continue. And that's where there is going to be a big bet on e-learning. So whoever asked the question, if you're on that platform, you're actually on a very great situation right now. Just be patient.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that already, right, with Zoom and with all of the others. So just I saw this very interesting branding that Google Meet had done the other day, that now they've gone completely free. So obviously people are going to capitalize on these opportunities. Cindy, are there any clear sort of trends that you are seeing from the UAE? In terms of certain industries which are picking up a lot more? I know that the logistics and delivery was picking up quite a bit, but are there other areas where you're seeing trends emerging?
That's a good question. The thing is that, me, but also in general, book network, for example, we're very global, right? And specifically in the entire region. So in terms of UAE, I'm not sure if I really have a lot of insight into that. Also, the startups, for example, that we see doing well, or the companies we see doing well, are mainly scattered in the region. But that being said, I would say it goes back to basics, right? As we said before, something that serves basic human needs in a way that is adapted to the current situation. That is definitely something that e-learning. I think there's it's just in general a real catalyst, as in other countries as well, right? Where there's still lack in terms of government regulations, for example, or government speed. So there's a lot of void right now that is being filled by startups. And that's pretty scattered across different industries because it's specific to the different business models. In general, it's really just about how the business model is able to, move from the physical to the virtual. So I'm sorry, I know it's a very generic answer, but I think, I think it's the best I can do in this context, just because it is such a scattered environment, especially with the startups as well.
Let me ask you another question. Are you also seeing more collaboration between the angel investors? Would they collaborate before as well? And has that changed? Okay, your voice is breaking up really badly, Cindy. Okay, let me come back to you then. Okay, somehow. Okay, so maybe Bradley, you can reflect a little bit. Are you seeing more collaboration happening between different angels where they're coming together to invest in different startups?
I see more people coming together to share their stories and to try to figure out what to do. I haven't seen different people aligning on deals yet. It might happen, but I've seen some camaraderie among people that are that don't usually talk and that aren't extremely open about what they've invested in, trying to get advice from people that have been in it for a long time. And what I see as far as trends going, beyond the obvious health-related tech stuff, I'm seeing a lot, of course, of collaboration tools like you mentioned with Zoom and Meet and Teams. I see this as advanced us in a direction we're already going, but just skipped ahead a few years. With automation, robotics being very heavy. So people are either furloughed or laid off, or they're working from home. And it's a lot easier when they're not in a plant to actually install robotics and without getting negatively impacted socially. So I think those efforts will be advanced a lot quicker than it would have been before. Data overall, as Cindy mentioned, is becoming more decentralized. Offices are becoming decentralized. I think any startup that's able to tie in a bunch of tools together, making efficiencies from working from home or making efficiencies from working from different offices, those are going to get a lot of attention from investors.
So, a follow-up question for you, Bradley, and then I'll ask the same question from you, Nirmal. Is it wise to seek investment right now? So,
yes.
Is it? Okay. From the startup's perspective.
There are a couple reasons, I think. One is a lot of people aren't seeking investment, so you have a better chance of being heard. Another reason, institutional funds still have money that they need to spend. And if you have less people vying for that money, now's a good chance for you. And then third is something, and I don't know if it's specific to what I'm seeing in the US or not, but the accessibility of good investors is much greater than it was before. Investor friends, either they're bored and they need something to do, they need somebody to talk to, or the barriers have been taken down. So I've known people that have told stories, at least, that they've tried to get in with certain investors for months or a year and never gotten a meeting. And I'm hearing every day now that, just had a great virtual pitch session with a certain angel investor or a certain group. So I think now's the time to jump in. And I would say focus very realistically on your financials and not paint something that's bigger than what's possible because of the risk aversion. And to be willing to take smaller cuts as you go instead of reaching for something really, really big.
So, okay, sorry for asking you one more question, but let me go ahead. Tell me something about valuation now. So obviously there is a possibility that investors may not value the startup at the same level as they would have previously. So how do you think startups should respond to something like that?
I think it's something we've all talked about. The higher valuations, you're going to go to companies that have greater runways, that have cut their costs, that are being very diligent about expenses. I think those are going to get higher valuations than the ones that have flashy offices and the ones that were the cool kid. The obvious things are there's some inflation in valuations of companies that have emotional impacts right now. Anything in health tech is going to be rated more valuably now, and that's probably going to shift back down to more reasonable levels. The same thing with the collaboration stuff. It's an important sector, but I think we're going to see some kind of bounce back. Overall, valuations are going to be lower. The pool of money, as I mentioned, institutional funds, they've got money now. I think when they raise their next $150 million fund, it's going to be a longer period of time. So I would say that's another reason to seek investment now because there is money. But as the economy overall shrinks, that money will decrease.
Okay, would any of the other people like to add to this?
Just want to quickly add to what Bradley said. There is going to be a demise of a lot of social enterprises who are cool kid social enterprises, kind of a phenomena. And that was supposed to happen in a slow phase anyways, but it is going to be this fast track. So the real ones would remain. Secondly, the valuations, that's where there was a risk we were talking about, Summer, that the investors needs to be really, really careful. Just because of tough times and a squeezed and cornered market, investors should not become vultures and here compassion and your intent would play a very, very, very strong role. So that's an internal kind of a moral dilemma that I think now investors would need to face, of how to look at a particular investment where that the founders or entrepreneurs are good. It has spirit, it has substance, and giving them a fair deal for their intellectual and resource input and is going to be critical.
Yes, and if I can jump in,
yes.
The venture capital were known as vulture capital, and I think Faraz mentioned that. So empathy is going to be a key terminology for the venture capitalists or the angel investors. But having said that, this is definitely a buyer's market. This is not a seller's market. The startups that are going to be raising, gone are the days of the customer acquisition stories and the high burn rates. It's going to be back to basics. Are you making money? The market has shrunk. Whatever your forecast was is going to shrink. Your valuation will actually shrink. But having a long-term approach and biting the bullet and getting in, or if you can get funding in at a lower valuation, I would say my advice would be get it, because then you're going to be better than your competitors and you can raise next rounds faster.
Okay, so now we've got a couple of interesting questions going back to the definitions and on that front. So there's somebody who's asking for the panelists' thoughts on where we draw the line on what we define as a social enterprise, because there have been many who come forward with a traditional manufacturing or service model, but argue with the point of creating employment and thus mention it as a social enterprise, right? So I've been told multiple times that Coke is a social enterprise because it employs so many people and it creates so many jobs. So I think this person is talking about that. And even during these troubled times, there is an argument where during curfew, even traditional delivery services were operating amidst the curfew and not overinflating their prices can be defined as social enterprises. So, it's going back to kind of like our definition and how do we define social enterprises? So Nirmal, do you want to start? Should I start with you?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Sama. Well, from my perspective, a social enterprise is something that pretty much the entire business model revolves around creating a social or environmental impact, positive impact. So, if we take the example of companies doing delivery during curfew, they will be having a social cause. But the question is whether they are going to do that moving forward as well as a continuous business model. And from my perspective, I think just because you give jobs to people doesn't make you a social enterprise. Because I think almost every entrepreneurial venture creates jobs. But you need to ensure that an integral part of your business, your decision making and fundamental go to market is dependent on creating a huge social benefit. Now, we can argue on the quantum of that social benefit, but we need to think, act, and behave like an enterprise that is concerned about society and the environment. And I would say that's the most simplest equation. But I would also like to use this opportunity, Sama, to add a little bit on what the other panelists also mentioned. I believe it's a good time for social enterprises to actually pitch at the moment, because whilst there is not many opportunities coming at the moment, there will be investors looking at what are the best ideas to invest. And I'll just give an example of what we have done over the last week or two. So through Lean, we have come up with a platform called Linkway, and we are actually now encouraging prospective social enterprises and investment ideas to come up with disruptive technology, other ideas related to the health sector. So this is where we've gone out and actually requested people to come and pitch in. We got the mentors, we got the ecosystem in place, we got some impact investors also willing to support. So that is where we have gone out to the market and requested people to come in. So it seems like the market is ready for that. But to define what a social enterprise is, I would always say look at it whether it's part of a business model.
Yeah, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. We also have another question about somebody wanting to learn more about impact investment and how it works. So I would say watch the beginning of the program because we described it right at the beginning. Then there is another question. Fahad is asking about, is impact investing the same as ESG investing or sustainable lending, which are more common terms in banking space? If not, could you help elaborate on the difference between these concepts? So panelists, who would like to answer this question?
I'll take a hit at this. This is a question that I got recently whilst I was teaching at university as well. So my definition is very simple. ESG to me is more or less like a compliance-driven approach towards investment. It's a tick in the box scenario. You feel good about it. It's something that you can brag around at the corporate boardroom level, that type of scenario. Impact investment is slightly more different. It's about the impact. It's about patient capital. It's not about ticking boxes, but rather working hand in hand with a social entrepreneur and trying to solve a real world problem. So that's my simple definition.
Okay, would anybody else like to add to that? Or, I think it's pretty comprehensive as it is, right? What you just said, Nirmal.
Nirmal did a great job.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to describe it. Okay, so let me move on. We've got some more questions that we saw people submitted. Okay, so investment-related plan in digital and innovative world. Okay, somebody asked that question. That's not very clear, but if somebody understands what this gentleman means, he's saying investment-related plan. What sort of investment-related plan should we develop in the digital and innovative world, maybe from the investor's perspective? Perhaps maybe that's what they're asking. I'm not really... Okay, anyway, then we've got another one. So how do we compare cross-sector impact of different projects? Some might not take hotspot in CSR ratings, but are equally important.
Right, I'll take that one.
Okay.
Earlier, Nirmal just rightly said that the conventional CSR needs to change and is changing, and then that's where the concept of corporate impact venturing has actually come into. And I would like to kind of elaborate that we have recently co-invested with one of Pakistan's leading corporates, which is Engro. It's like the second largest dairy procurer in the country after Nestle, and which has recently been bought by Friesden Company, the Dutch firm. And it took us 2.5 years to make the corporates understand the value of the money they put in for CSR and how we can actually take that value and multiply it quadruple times in terms of impact and return on investment. Engro is I think one of the most experimental and far-sighted corporates in the country, and they said yes. So we launched an agri-silage company in Punjab, which is one of the provinces of Pakistan, which actually focuses on making nutritional silage and selling it in small quantities to women farmers across their supply and distribution communities. And the sheer growth of that paradigm has really transformed not only the communities, but the mindset of the institutions and development sector. So there are two development sectors who are actually co-investing it further into it. So the concept of CSR is radically changing with concepts like blended finance and corporate impact venturing. And I think this COVID scenario is going to again fast track this mindset into real tangible investments, co-investments in the social enterprise sector.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, of course. Yes.
So, CSR also will be looked at a bit differently in the new world, because if there is a company that is spending millions of dollars on good things or CSR activities, and on the other hand, it's an industry that is causing a lot of pollution in the area and affecting people's health, then the balance to the P&L of that company doing CSR will also be looked at. And that's where impact investment will have a bit of a different angle, saying that net, what is your impact? Is it just one thing, or is it a combination of things? And that's what startups, I think, should be now looking at very clearly. Is it net, what is the impact, as opposed to just what is highlighted and what is visible?
I'm going to repeat myself, but it makes me very happy, because there is this very clear silver lining where everybody in a way has to shift gears and shift their mindset and stop thinking only about money at the end of the day, right? Which is just one of the verticals that you should be looking at. And there is a question that came from the audience as well. Investors seem to focus heavily on growth and revenue as opposed to profitability in making investment decisions. Will this change as the economy contracts? So would one of the panelists want to answer that?
Sorry, I couldn't get the question properly.
So if you go into the private chat, I've posted all of the questions there. This is question number 5.
Okay, I mean, in my world, at least in Southeast United States, I mean, profitability has been key. It hasn't been just the growth in the revenue. Maybe West Coast is a little bit different, but for us, we're doing smaller size rounds here. We need to see a profit. So I don't see it changing here. It was already that for us.
Yeah.
I think I might want to add something there, Sama. I think into the new playbook, we need to also add the word scalability as well, because sometimes growth can be dependent based on geographies as well. But especially from a social enterprise perspective, scalability matters a lot because that's where the impact will also be more. I'll give you a quick example. I think COVID-19 has shown the world the importance of food security, and we feel that most of the poorer countries will have a huge problem with these lockdowns of getting access to food. Now, if you are to create a scalable model there, that sometimes might have to take precedence over profitability because you're looking at it from an impact perspective. So I think that terminology also will now need to come in more than ever before.
Okay. So then, does anybody else want to answer? Yes, you want to add something, Cindy?
Yeah, I hope the internet connection is good enough.
Okay.
Yeah, I would also like to add that in general, so far, our investors are also focusing much more, for example, on the founding team, attraction, and as you rightly mentioned, right, scalability, and that's their mindset. And I don't see that really changing after COVID. I don't see it changing right now, and I think that's just the nature of startup investment, and especially in the impact space. As was also mentioned before, right, that it's a very specific space where you're investing. It's very early stage. So our investors really do look at, what, how scalable is the business model. So now the only question is, in light of COVID, how scalable is it really, and does it serve the basic need? But if that question is answered, if the team is able to pivot, which was also discussed earlier, right? If they are able to respond in a good way, then that is really I also see will be the main criteria moving forward.
Absolutely. So I completely agree with you, because when we're talking about right at the beginning, angel investment, I don't know what, by the way, so this is really funny because technology keeps acting up as well. I was just going to add to that and say the technology also, right? So that's become even more important, I think, in this post-COVID-19 crisis. I mean, and during it as well, otherwise, how are we supposed to host all of these interesting conversations, right? So there is that whole opportunity as well for people to look at becoming digitally savvy, at introducing digital technology. If they weren't doing that already, then they need to think about that a lot more and really integrate that within their business. So I think that's something which we've seen. Other social enterprises, the ones who are able to do that. So, for instance, if somebody was cooking food and selling it, okay, now maybe it's time to teach people how to cook different foods, so that in the interim you don't disappear. I think you have to be out there a lot more. Then there's another question: it's more about the pandemic. There are a couple of people who've asked, how can we manage the pandemic? So I'm not really sure if we're really, the right people to answer that question. But if you've seen some strategies that have worked really well in your different geographies, please feel free to share.
I probably might give one quick example of a social enterprise that I know. The company is called Ecofield Foods. They go by the brand Ricey. So what happened was, when the lockdown happened in Sri Lanka, getting essential services like food and so forth from the supermarkets was a huge problem because it was curfew and not necessarily a lockdown. So this company is a social enterprise based in the central province of Sri Lanka, and they provide these unique dried fruit and vegetable products. So they were able to speak with the health authorities and ensure that they get those products as essential services, so that they can start using it without having to go and buy it from a supermarket or a street vendor. So I've also seen social enterprises across the world. I was actually going through it while the panel was going on. It seems like the social enterprises have been more nimble, agile than the traditional enterprises. Maybe because they were looking at it from a social cause. And I probably want to take this opportunity to ask a question from Sonia on the investment side, on the technology. Financial inclusiveness, we've seen, is a big challenge now across the Asian region, especially in emerging markets like where we all come from. Where do you see technology playing a role in this financial inclusiveness space? Because it's going to help social enterprises a lot if you can get these platforms in place.
Yeah, so just to give you in context example, in Bangladesh, our garments, ready-made garment sector is hugely, we have like 4 million people employed. And because of the COVID situation, the factories being closed, the government has enforced every factory to be paying through the wallet or through a mobile financial service. So we see that back again to again that same point that the acceleration is going to happen much faster to solve a problem because most of these people do not have bank accounts, but now they are going to be forced, they have been forced to open the wallets, which is in between. So the digital wallet is coming in, and that is doing KYC and giving them access to finance. So financial inclusion will be fast tracked and accelerated to meet the needs of the people. So I'm very hopeful that this acceleration will bring in technology that will offer services to not specifically the brick and mortar banking services, but through the fintech disruption that we have.
Okay. There's another question which I think is interesting. We've talked a little bit about it, but maybe we can add some more. What are 3 things startups will need to do differently in the post-corona, stage to stand out?
I'll give you one.
Like your opportunity to give advice, right?
I'll give you one. What's important is not technology, but the product market fit. So customer matters a lot. Ensure that you do your test marketing. Ensure that you do your pilots properly. Ensure that you don't try to find gaps within the MVP models. So customer.
I think that's a great answer, right? And nowadays we're running this virtual accelerator. And this is the biggest problem that I'm finding because, some of them already have their minimum viable products, or they're in the process and they've done their customer discovery, customer research, and they say, oh, we know everything about the customer, right? And startups just don't want to do that sometimes, the hard work that's required. And Faraz is smiling right there because maybe he sees that a lot as well, Faraz.
No, absolutely. Like you said it, and like Nirmal said it, it's critical to understand the market and the dynamically changing market needs, and keep on predicting that because we've realized that we're extremely vulnerable. And our arrogance as humans to know the future has really been totally thrown out of the window. We realize that we're actually very vulnerable. And there is a lot of strength in that vulnerability. And if you're honest to that vulnerability, your connectivity with your customer and your stakeholders will be really, really genuine. Create that genuine bond, and scale and growth and money and impact all will come. But I think it's a great time for all these entrepreneurs out there to do a very quick rediscovery process of the intent and the business models and the processes. Just do an audit of that, and you would feel that this COVID has actually taught us a lot of things. And if you can genuinely transform and transcend those changes into your enterprise, I promise you, you'll be happier and you'll create more impact and money as well.
So I quickly want to go ahead. Yes.
Yes, two sentences. Basically, yes, and also stay agile. I would maybe emphasize that a little bit more too. So yes, we should definitely do an audit now of your business model, your relationship to the market, and so on. But also make sure to implement that as a daily practice, basically, because it's so easy to just get stuck in your idea and think you have it all figured out, right? But just also post-COVID and also after everything is said and done, still continue doing that in order to be successful.
Okay, Sonia, you wanted to add something?
Yeah. So one of the things that I would say that the startups need to do is because of the lockdown and the companies, a lot of companies being closed, there is the inefficiency factor that will rise. We see that among all of us. So those that will remain efficient in this moment of inefficiency will actually get some benefit. So that's something I worry about. So it's very important to stay efficient during this time where it's very difficult to be efficient, and to keep a very positive mindset, because these two, your mental well-being is going to take you out of this. It's a difficult time, it's not easy, but you will need to navigate through this with some mental health and some efficiency that will be built into the core of your DNA.
Okay, so look, I want to show you guys another comment, right? So somebody has summed up our discussion pretty well. So I think we did a good job here. He says means investment made into companies, organizations, and funds with the intention to generate a sustainable, a measurable, beneficial social or environmental impact alongside a financial return, not for just charity. So I think he's really summarized it pretty well. So I think maybe now I'm just going to ask for closing remarks then from everyone. And Bradley, let's start with you because you've been awfully quiet.
Yes. Okay. So just touching on, I think the highlights of what we've covered so far is from an investor perspective and early stage startups, don't be shy. Reach out now. Be smart about your approach, but now's your opportunity. And I didn't answer the last question, but talking to customers cannot be overemphasized here. We've got now is an opportunity to call your customers. Somebody mentioned empathy earlier in the discussion. Hear their stories, hear what they're going through. Don't sell them anything right now, but develop a relationship and listen. And that's something that we're kind of sometimes headed so fast on our path of what we think's right or what we've been told's right that we don't have an opportunity to sit back and actually ask our customers, what exactly are you going through? And I think to answer whoever's question that was about the things that we can do as a startup, and that's something that I would be looking for. I'd like to know that the last month and a half, you spent every day calling your customers or potential customers. You've heard their stories. They become your friends, and you know more about their business than they do now. And so now's a great time. I mean, the world's still in chaos. We still don't know exactly what's going to happen as far as business goes, but I'm optimistic that we've got unique opportunities that we can take advantage of to make an impact in things that we're passionate about. And that's something else I meant to mention. We're looking for honesty. We're looking for people that are being authentic, that are definitely business sound, but this brings us all back to like a real human nature. And I think we want to be around people that are honest with us and that really mean to do something good. And especially in the early stages, you need your investors to believe that you're doing something impactful. So my closing remark is now's the time, go for it, and good things are going to happen.
I think that's great. I think that's great advice for the startups if they're listening in. If not, I'm going to at least make my startups watch the entire video. I'm a Hitler. Okay, so who else wants to give the closing remarks? Cindy, should we hear from you?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Bradley. I think that was a really good closing remark. I don't have a lot to add. Maybe the only thing I would like to highlight is don't overthink, should I seek investment now or not, given that we're in a COVID situation. Really just look at your business, start from scratch in terms of how your relationship with your customers are, all the points that Bradley just mentioned. Focus on that, and then if you see that you really need investment and you're looking for investment, go for it. But do not be deterred just because we are in a very peculiar situation to look for investment. On the contrary, right? We've discussed that there's actually a lot of opportunities. We see it as well. Our investors might be a little bit more risk averse, of course, yes. But that doesn't mean that there's no funds out there or that you should be taking that into consideration. Just do what Bradley said, and I think investors will actually be looking for you. And yeah, so I think that's pretty cool.
Okay, Nirmal, do you want to go next?
Yes, Sama. So I think from my perspective, the advice to startups and social enterprises would be that look at your prospective investors, not only as people who can provide you capital, but who can provide you the networks, the know-how, as well as who can guide and mentor you. That's very critical. And we see that in the impact investment space as well. On the other hand, I think this is a wonderful time for people to get into entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship or not, because the world needs problem solvers. I think it's very critical that we encourage entrepreneurship at a country level, regional and at a global level. From a concluding remark, I would like to share one thought for everybody who is watching this live webinar. Think about the loop model. This is a model that I have created, and I call it LOOP. So be logical. L is for logical. In whatever you do, do not take emotions into play, but take a logical pathway. O is for opportunity. Always look out for opportunity. With every pandemic or every crisis, there are opportunities coming out, and the best entrepreneurs are able to spot those opportunities. The other O in the loop model is be open-minded, be willing to take the advice of your mentors and impact investors, and be open-minded towards the world. And last but not the least, the P stands for perseverance and performance. For any startup, that's absolutely critical. I wish everybody all the best in their entrepreneurial journeys. Keep rocking and stay safe. Thanks for inviting me, Sama.
Okay, Faraz, we're going to jump to you now.
Well, wise words have already been spoken. I would just look at this concluding remark from two ends, one from the entrepreneurs end and one from the investors end. Entrepreneurs end, it's just stay true to yourself. Do an audit of your intent and your processes, everything will fall in place. From the investor's perspective, there are two mindsets. One is the community mindset, and the other one is the ROI mindset. And I think you would see both these mindsets coming together now during this crisis and post this crisis. So it's a great opportunity for social enterprise sectors specifically to demonstrate what they can really achieve. So it's just like you're in World Cup finals, and you have the whole world is watching you now, and all the sponsors are there as well. Whoever has got the real metal will actually be the next rising star of the world.
Thank you, Faraz. Okay, Sonia.
So I have three parting remarks. One is, if you are thinking of starting a startup, if you're a wannabe startup, my advice would be please hold position. We're still in a very, very dynamic state with COVID-19. We don't know where things will go. So hold position, observe, and then figure out what you want to do. If you are a startup that does not have runway for the rest of the year, please think of merging with other startups, consolidating, think of creative ways of sharing resources and surviving. And if you are a startup that has runway, go get him, carpe diem, the market is yours. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Sonia. I think thank you to all the panelists for sharing such great advice. We've also got a very smart person who's been listening in. So Maria Mispahani is saying, I think an investor should share the startup's vision, especially re-impact investing, right? And I think that's really, really important, something that all of us are reflecting on. In a way, we've trimmed all of the fat. So right now, because of COVID-19, this has presented this huge opportunity to all of us to really just focus on the things that matter. We're focused on our families, we're focused on our parents, on children. We're focused, even when we talk about businesses, we're focused on retaining our staff and getting rid of all of the extra, luxuries or things that, we didn't need. And similarly, when you're looking at your business as well and trying to pivot or trying to really, make it through, basically to survive, it is about getting rid of everything which you didn't really need to do because maybe you were copying someone else. Maybe it was a competitor that was doing something and you were forcing yourself to do that. So I think in a way, it's also becoming very, very true to your core and your business. And if you are working to solve people's problems, then at the end of the day, people will need you and they'll want to buy your service or your product. It's really as simple as that. So thank you very, very much to all of my panelists. I hope you grab your coffee. Bradley, if it helps, most of us are fasting anyway, okay? So, you're kind of fasting with us and giving us company. Thank you very, very much for making time. And inshallah, we'll continue talking to you guys some more.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you guys.